herders. It was the latest in a series of confrontations. The government wants land fenced off into farms for crops and ranches for livestock, with a ban on open grazing. Climate-induced desertification has pushed Muslim herders further south, clashing with Christian farmers over shrinking water resources.
Now, Interpol says cybercrime is increasing across Africa, accounting for over 30% of reported crime. The countries worst affected are South Africa, Kenya and Nigeria. The BBC's David Bamford again.
Cybercrime costs the world over $8 trillion a year. The latest Interpol report highlights the problems faced by African countries, many of which do not have an up-to-date legal framework or technical ability to confront the deluge of illegal activity. Interpol said online scams, ransomware and digital sextortion are constantly evolving. The introduction of artificial intelligence is exacerbating the problem. There have been some successes. Two recent police operations in Africa, Serengeti and Red Card, resulted in more than 1,000 arrests, but the future looks challenging.
And finally, South Africa's Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, has visited the Karan beef feedlot in Heidelberg in the Gauteng province as part of his visits to foot-and-mouth hit disease vaccination sites in Gauteng. The feedlot has been affected by the outbreak. The first batch of 900,000 vaccines arrived in the country last week from Botswana. Steenhuisen says the vaccination process is now well underway.
We've put aside 42 million rand for vaccines. The first batch of 900,000 arrived last week. When was it? Last week?
Thursday.
Last week, Thursday. And obviously we'll be procuring more as we embark upon a vaccination program to get it under control. And then obviously we'll then move towards putting in place other initiatives as well to try and curb the spread.
Embrace our young voices this month. Channel Africa, celebrating Youth Month. At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tshepiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
And it is 8 minutes past 9, and of course it's Youth Month. We'll look at not just Youth Month today, but we'll also tell you about an important day that you may or may not be aware of. Today is, can you believe it, is International Women in Engineering. For the day 2025, we'll tell you about the theme, and joining us will be Haupalelwe Jabani, a service specialist at ABB Electrification. So we'll find out. So as we always say on this program, we bring you the voices, the people and the perspectives that matter. One story that we've been watching, and certainly the continent has been watching, the intrigue surrounding it, it's the saga around the former President Edgar Lungu. South Africa's International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola says a state funeral in Zambia would be the most fitting way to honour the former President Edgar Lungu's legacy. Lamola met with Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema in Lusaka and made reports that Lungu's family prefers to bury him in South Africa. The former leader died earlier this month while receiving treatment in Pretoria. Bonolo Maribe has the latest on that.
The family of the late former Zambian president, Edgar Lungu, wants the sixth Zambian leader to be buried in South Africa. International Relations and Cooperation Minister Ronald Lamola has gone to Lusaka as the presidential special envoy as the bitter feud between Lungu's family and the current Zambian government continues. The minister's spokesperson, Crispin Piri, says that this is a sensitive matter.
In reaffirming the South African government's position, Minister Lamola emphasized that a state burial in Zambia represents the most fitting tribute to honor former President Lungu's distinguished legacy and service to the Zambian nation. Concurrently, Minister Lamola acknowledged that the legal obligation to respect the expressed wishes of the late former president's family are also of primacy.
Lungu's family says they will continue to seek peace and unity among Zambians during this time. The family has expressed its appreciation to the South African government for their respectful support to hold a private funeral and burial in South Africa. President of the Patriotic Front, Miles Sampa, says that the political party will miss him.
Yeah, turn of events, obviously very saddening and emotional. It's going towards 3 weeks now, but thank God we're getting to the burial day. It's unfortunate that clearly the family and the government, or President, a church, the state, have not come to a common agreement. The government did not do or wanted to do what was not agreed by the family.
Meanwhile, among the leaders who have been buried outside their countries and their bodies have never been repatriated is former Congolese strongman Mobutu Sese Seko, who was laid to rest in Morocco in the 90s. Bonolo Maribe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
At 11 minutes past 9, let's continue with the program looking at some of the top stories coming out of the globe. Parliamentarians for Global Action have expressed deep concern over Hungary's official decision to withdraw from the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. It was announced this month. The unprecedented move by a European Union member state represents a significant setback for international justice and efforts to combat impunity. Joining us now to speak about the impact of this latest move and what to expect going forward, Frederica Schweiger-Ferrova, Director of the International Law and Human Rights Program at Parliamentarians for Global Action. Apologies for that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. And actually, apologies for this, but I would like to switch to video, but for that I need to change the device. So can I call you back now?
No, it's fine. We can
using
continue.
a different device. Would that be possible?
We can continue with audio if that's okay with you.
Pardon me?
We can continue with an audio interview. It's fine. Our listeners can hear you.
No, it's fine. I actually wanted to switch to video if that's okay.
Yes. So unfortunately, because what it'll do is that it'll delay the other interviews after you, and we are running on a tight schedule. I do apologize for that.
All right.
We didn't have a chance.
Okay, so I'm on my. I'm not sure if you can see me well, but in any case.
Yes.
So hi. Thank you very much for having me. Of course, I'm very happy to reply to any questions.
Yes, so let's talk about the significance of that. This, we say it's unprecedented, but let's talk about why particularly at this time, at this juncture, I believe this became effective as of the 2nd of June. Has there been a series of events that have led to this decision by Hungary?
So perhaps just to mention, it's going to become effective in 1 year. So it's 1 year after the deposit of the withdrawal. So it's going to be effective only as of then. So in 2026 and in June. And by then, Hungary keeps being obliged to cooperate with the court, and it still remains to be a state party. And in fact, it is going to be still held accountable for the failure to cooperate with the court during the period when it actually still was a state party, which was actually in relation to the failure to arrest Israeli Prime Minister in Budapest. And that's actually what triggered the action. And of course, we've seen this in the past with Burundi and the Philippines. It's been always I would say, maybe rather, the case when states are held to account. It's basically their way of trying to evade accountability by stating that they would not respect the ICC because suddenly they may actually come under its jurisdiction. So that's when it becomes no longer convenient to be adhering to the norms of the court. And it's, of course, particularly in the context of Hungary, we've seen a long, a very significant backslide of Hungary's democracy and deterioration in several areas at several layers. So it's really closely moving to a really strong authoritarian regime where we've seen the basically shrinking space for civil society, for fundamental freedoms. There has been recently a very problematic amendment to its fundamental law, which is against the LGBTIQ people. We see we observed in the last decades an attempt, unfortunately successful, to alter the elections. So it's really discrimination against against citizens, against marginalized communities, suppression of the opposition and any critics, and of course this comes hand in hand with also disregard for international norms. In 2018, the European Parliament started what's called Article 7.1 procedure. There has been no progress, so it's basically under the Treaty of the EU. It's when there is a risk of a serious breach of fundamental norms, then there is a procedure that can trigger such. It's a mechanism that can trigger such consideration. But it's been 7 years. I believe there's been 7 hearings, and nothing has really made any. There has been no progress. So it also that kind of lack of real decisive actions may enable such development.
So Hungary, you say that it'll still be legally bound by the Rome Statute until 2nd June 2026. So this process has a year to take effect. But Hungary, I believe, is saying that, the statute was never really fully domesticated, or there was a lack of promulgation of the ratification bill. Is there a difference in legal opinion of this extrapolation of what's happening now?
So it was bound by the Rome Statute, whether it promulgated or not. It's within its, once it ratified, and there has been quite some conversation on this, and experts actually also explaining why this is actually not relevant. And Hungary was a state party to the Rome Statute, and it was bound, and I mean it has been bound, but even without the promulgation. So it's that doesn't actually have any legal effect, I would say, in reality when it comes to its obligations.
So the agreement between the EU and the International Criminal Court, is it seen as a collective, or is there some level of autonomy for and from the nations that is enjoyed? As in, being a signatory, I understand there are 47 European countries who are part of this. Does it bind them together as a collective, or does it see the collective as comprising individual nations?
So, of course, there is now a conversation whether the Rome Statute is, or the obligation to ratify the Rome Statute forms EU acquis, which is basically the basic norms of the EU law. This consideration has been triggered following a question of an MEP, member of the European Parliament. So that's very important to clarify whether it's actually an obligation of EU member states to ratify. Of course, it's aligned with the fundamental norms and principles of the EU. We see it's within its EU external action objectives. In the accession agreement, so the agreements between the EU and the new candidate states to become EU member states, such accession agreements actually include an article on the ratification of the Rome Statute. So one could interpret this as a sign that actually it is a part of the EU law, but it's been now determined. And of course, it's highly worrisome and deeply troubling that an EU state has decided to withdraw. And of course, this goes absolutely against the EU fundamental principles and values. And for that reason, the EU should actually act quite decisively and trigger the mechanisms that it has at its disposal, such as, I mentioned Article 7.1, but then there is 7.2, so it's basically within the same article, but 2 different mechanisms which requires a little bit higher threshold. But that one is when there is determination of an existence of a serious breach of fundamental values, and that can trigger already some ramifications, such as suspension of voting rights. So yes, I mean even though EU, of course, it's a union. There are, as you are aware, there are common. A lot of areas are within individual sphere of every state. Then there are common, and then there is exclusive EU mandates. So of course, or right. Let's say power over. So
let's talk about that commonality of EU values and the responsibilities to uphold that, particularly when we're talking about the strengthening of victims' rights and international law. Are there fears that there are other European countries that could follow suit, given the fact that we have seen that, especially through elections, Europe seems to be moving more and more to the right?
Yes, that's unfortunately true. Hungary is, I would say, for now, and I sincerely believe that it's going to remain the case, its authoritarian regime is quite, unique so far in Europe and in the EU. So we trust that would not trigger any other, or it would not influence any other decision, because Hungary has been as I mentioned, for decades on the verge of becoming a regime which would probably lead to such decisions. In terms of other countries within the EU, I would not be able to say, of course, one never knows, but I do believe that would not actually be the case. Okay. Now, outside of the EU, of course, we saw in the news a few weeks ago the UK statement, and basically that threat to withdraw from the ICC in light basically of the same current decision by the court, which has really polarized international community, unfortunately, and has suddenly made states question courts' independence and impartiality. But it's not really, but that's not an EU state now. Right. So.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I really appreciate your time. Frederica Streiger-Varova, Director of the International Law and Human Rights Program at Parliamentarians for Global Action, brings the time to 24 minutes past 9, just about.
In this episode of Channel Africa Conversations, Peter talks to Dr. Thulisile Buda, an academic, author, and an expert in indigenous knowledge systems. Join us for a compelling discussion on preserving African languages and traditions in the digital era. Dr. Thulisile unpacks the role of educators, explorers, and how technologies like AI can support cultural preservation, and challenges us to rethink how we honor African heritage. You can find the episode on YouTube, SABC Plus, and on our website, channelafrica.co.za. This episode is a must-listen for educators, creators, and change makers across the continent. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Embrace our young voices. This month, Channel Africa, celebrating Youth Month. At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tshepiso Mokoena.
Channel Africa. And we continue with the top stories of the day from the heart of Africa to all corners of the globe. This time we take you to the United Kingdom, where an UK High Court ruling has cleared the way for Shell plc and its former Nigerian subsidiary to be held legally responsible for decades of oil pollution in Nigeria. The case involves historic spills affecting the Ogale and Bele communities Despite Shell's attempt to block the case, the court found it may still be liable, especially if it failed to prevent oil theft or if its staff were complicit. Joining us now from London is Matthew Renshaw, international team partner at Lee Day, a law firm representing the affected communities. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening. Good to be speaking with you.
I must say, I personally feel like it's an historic ruling because for decades, people in various communities of Nigeria have sought to hold Shell legally responsible and accountable for some of these oil spills. What has been the reaction following the court ruling?
So, well, I've been explaining the ruling to our clients, and they're very relieved and very excited. Shell were putting up various legal arguments, various legal barriers to try to stop them getting to trial and having their whole case heard. So in relation to legacy oil spills, in relation to liability for oil theft, Shell were trying to knock all of that out before the main trial. And thankfully for us and for our clients, they failed to do so. So our clients are delighted. They're looking forward to the main trial in 2027, although it's also tinged with ongoing frustration that their cases, which have been going on for a decade now, still have to wait another 18 months or 2 years before they'll be heard. But at least we now know that their cases will be heard and heard in full.
And just in terms of the legal argument made by the lawyers on behalf of Shell on the legacy pollution, the fact that there was a strict 5-year limitation period, how did they arrive, to that conclusion?
Sure, yeah. So under Nigerian law, the court did find that there is a 5-year limitation period. Shell were trying to rely on that to say any spill that happened more than 5 years ago, you can't claim in relation to. But what the court found was that where Shell hasn't cleaned up that oil spill, so where it's still there and it's still continuing to cause an impact, then it may be open to clients, to communities, to still come back and claim for those oil spills. So potentially this opens the door to many other communities as well as these two who may be impacted by Shell's legacy oil pollution, which has blighted so many communities in the Niger Delta.
And is it a precedent here that's been set by the judge to say that a new course of action will arise each day that oil remains on a claimant's land? As in, as you mentioned, for as long as the pollution continues while they're still there, that they are liable?
Exactly. So without wanting to get too technical and legal, what the court was finding was that every day Shell fails to clean up, that could be seen as an ongoing wrong. So every day they should do that. And every day if they fail to do that, it creates a new cause of action, a new legal claim. So you're exactly right. That's the argument that ultimately will be tested at trial. Is there this duty on Shell day by day to clean up? And if so, in these cases, has Shell breached it? And our clients say in relation to both questions, the answer must be yes.
And Shell, as you mentioned before, was trying to hold others accountable for the pollution, including Niger Delta, illegal activities such as theft that were going on there, and the local artisanal refining of oil. What was their rationale?
So anyone who has followed this story at all will know that Shell always points the finger at what they call local criminality. So oil theft or illegal refining, they say done by locals. And in this case, they argued that where pollution or leaks are caused by oil theft, they can't be liable. They can never be responsible, they said. And essentially for them, it would be a get out of jail free card. But what the court found again was that no, if they fail to take basic precautions, if they fail to adopt reasonable measures that they seem to do elsewhere in the world, then potentially they can be liable even where a spill was caused by oil theft or by illegal refining. So again, given the situation in the Niger Delta and how Shell views its responsibilities there, that's potentially a very significant decision. And we are very much looking forward to having tested at trial whether Shell did take those reasonable basic precautions that our client said it should have taken.
And I'd imagine that just looking forward at what might happen, there will be a very interesting clash of interests that Shell would say, well, we did take what they might argue reasonable precautions in terms of protecting our infrastructure. But there's also the Nigerian constitution in terms of the constitutional rights of those communities and what responsibility the Nigerian government bears, especially in terms of hosting international investors, and how much of the responsibility both carry.
So our claims are solely against Shell. So our clients are pursuing claims against Shell PLC, which is the head office based here in London, and its Nigerian subsidiary. So our claims are not against the Nigerian government. We are saying that Shell, both Shell PLC and its subsidiary, are legally responsible for the oil contamination. In terms of the Nigerian government, that's maybe less of a sort of legal question for me. But what I would say is that the background to this is that Shell has just divested its onshore Nigeria operation. And our clients, as well as I think many other people in the Niger Delta, are anxious that Shell shouldn't just walk away from its legacy pollution, that they should take steps to clean up. And we're hopeful that the Nigerian government will share that view and will do what it can to also ensure that Shell does a proper cleanup in these communities which have been impacted by its operations over many decades.
And I'm not trying to take you away from what is core to the issue, and that is the legal and constitutional rights of these communities, including the land on which they occupy, the minerals that they should be benefiting from. But I'm just trying to think ahead in terms of the precedent-setting nature of this when it comes to environmental protection and rights between corporations and governments, because sometimes governments, also shirk their responsibilities in the name of, well, we're bringing in investment, and it is those very governments that end up benefiting and not the communities in which these multinational corporations actually house their operations.
I mean, that is a complaint of the two communities we represent, and a common complaint of many communities, that they, even though it's under their land that these resources sit, they see no benefit from them. And over decades, they've seen Shell benefiting massively from its oil exploitation and operation in the Niger Delta over their land. They've seen lots of that money pour into London, into The Hague, and make Shell an awful lot of money over that period. And you're exactly right, in terms of the justice in that and the fairness of that, it's certainly questionable. And as I said, with Shell divesting at the moment and trying to walk away from its operation, it feels like this is a real opportunity or a necessity to try to right that wrong and try to seek redress and correct that imbalance and try to ensure that the communities that actually live on the land where this oil is found, at the very least, aren't left with a legacy of chronic contamination.
So what next, particularly for the community while they await that big trial? And are there any challenges that are foreseen?
So I'm sure there'll be many challenges leading up to the trial in early 2027. A big thing that's happening next is Shell are going to have to give disclosure of their internal documents. So we hope that we will be finding out about what Shell knew about this problem, when they knew it, and what decisions they took in relation to stopping this oil contamination. So we're looking forward to that. We'll pick out a selection of what are called lead claims. So some of our clients will come to London and have their individual cases heard and tell their stories here in the court in London. So I am sure that our clients are looking forward to the chance to do that after a decade of waiting. No doubt, Shell will try and put further legal obstacles and further legal challenges before we get to that trial. But after this decision, it is now certain that that trial will happen, and it will happen where all of the claims that our clients want to bring will be heard and tested.
Matthew, we thank you for your time and your insights. Matthew Renshaw is international team leader at Lead Day, speaking on that recent UK court ruling. I think actually happened today. That rule that Shell can be held accountable for decades of oil pollution in Nigeria. So it brings the time to 23 minutes to 10.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine, weekdays 6 till 9.
In recent weeks, East Africa has seen a disturbing rise in human rights violations. In Kenya, digital activist Rose Njeri was arrested under the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act after creating a tool for citizens to oppose the Finance Bill 2025. Meanwhile, in Tanzania, Kenyan activist Boniface Mwangi and Ugandan lawyer Agatha Atuhaire reported being detained, tortured, and sexually assaulted by security officers.
East Africa needs a reset. We need to get back East Africa to where the founding fathers are. You know, when President Nyerere and his colleagues Jomo Kenyatta and the Ugandan counterparts fought for independence, they fought for independence to get Africans out of poverty, to get Africans out of slavery. The leaders who took up power have since gotten into regression.
Neto Agostino, co-leader of the United Green Movement Party.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine. Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And we continue with coverage of local and international news. We've just been to the United Kingdom to tell you about how Shell has been told that it is liable for oil spills in Nigeria. Now we tell you about what's happening with South Africa and the World Bank. The country's National Treasury and the World Bank have agreed on a $1.5 billion loan to support structural reforms aimed to boost the country's infrastructure goals. In a statement on Monday, the government said the 16-year loan, taken as 6-month secured overnight financing rate plus 1.49%, is favourable. To speak to us, we're joined now by Kevin Tutani, political economist and consultant at Zanu Guru Advisory in Zimbabwe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great, thank you for having me as well.
So let's just talk first and explain in layman's terms to our listeners and viewers the loan, how it's pillared on 3 anchors for structural reform. What exactly are we talking about?
Right, the communique that I read, which the Treasury released, that's a few days ago, a few hours ago, I'm not too sure, but the communique that I read actually says that Treasury wants to finance rail and ports, freight, logistics. Treasury also wants to finance electricity, but you see that it seems that they have a focus on renewable energy and not particularly highlighting coal. They talk so much about renewable in that communique. That's what's mentioned in specific.
And renewables has been something that, and depending on which side of the fence you are viewing it from or who you're listening to, in some cases, it's been said to be a smokescreen and unfavorable for South Africa in the long run, given the fact that Europe itself is not cutting down on the use of fossil fuels to grow their economies. And while we're struggling, we are being promised all of these grants, these loans, which in the end will burden South Africa. What is your view of this argument in line of what has been revealed?
Well, look, renewable energy is not something that I think South Africa has to be focusing on at the moment, because if you look at it, coal and fossil fuels are cheap, okay? So by inference, that means if you invest in a coal plant, you're going to charge consumers, that's households in South Africa, businesses over there, and if you're going to export that electricity to SADC as well, you can include SADC in there. So when you use fossil fuels, when you use coal, your tariffs are going to be cheaper, because the investment really that you've used to invest in fossil fuels is going to be less, right? Now, renewable energy is expensive. You see, a 1,000 megawatt renewable energy plant will operate on average producing 25% of its capacity. It will operate as though it were a 250 megawatt fossil fuel plant, something along those lines. So you see, but it's a 1,000 megawatt plant, and pound for pound, you could obviously set it up at the same price that you set up a 1,000 megawatt coal plant. You see, but a coal plant, it doesn't have, it operates almost at full capacity. So renewable energy is a little bit expensive, and that's why some experts have been saying that we need to talk of energy addition and not energy transition, because that's what developed countries themselves have been doing. They have been adding on to what we call baseload capacity, they've been adding on to the fossil fuel capacity which they already have. So they're not necessarily transferring, but they're just adding on. Then you have countries like Germany, which actually attempted an actual transition, and in that transition they put out their baseload electricity, they put out their coal plants, they decommissioned them, they decommissioned the nuclear plants, so they decommissioned the cheaper energy. Germany did that, and then they began to invest in renewable energy. Now, energy in Germany is expensive, the economy is going into recession, and things aren't looking good economically. So, I'm on this side of the fence which says that I think South Africa is not particularly ready to make bold moves in investment in renewable energy. I don't think the country can afford that at the moment.
And I mean, the argument is fair and is understood in terms of the urgency of the climatic changes that we're seeing and what we're feeling. But if you're saying energy security is a priority of reform, does this plan address the lingering power system unreliability, even though we've seen improvement?
Well, look, what the communique that Treasury put out, it seems to actually highlight sustainable energy. And when you look at it, that is going to be renewable energy. That's what it seems to insinuate, although obviously we don't have the specifics as you've been saying, but once we get the specifics, perhaps we won't continue to speculate like this. But when you read the communique, you're going to find it really mentions sustainability, it really mentions renewable energy bywords when it's talking about the energy side of its commitment, that it needs to use the loan for. So that's what it's looking like. So renewable energy is expensive, really, and climate change is happening, it's real, but can South Africa afford that crossover at the moment? I actually don't think so. So in terms of, like you're asking, stabilizing the grid, making more energy available, well, look, it could be possible. It could be possible because South Africa's economy has kind of been stagnating. So because the economy itself has not been growing, the demand for energy might not continue to increase. So only on account of a stagnating economy will the energy be enough. But if the economy begins to grow, then South Africa needs more energy capacity. And I don't think we're looking at renewable energy. We're looking at actually fossil energy and maybe nuclear energy, which is more reliable and perhaps somehow works out cheaper in the long term than renewable. And so that's what we're looking at to stabilize the grid if the economy begins to grow.
So obviously, and it's been interesting to just watch budget speeches over the years, over the decades. A great part of it has always been infrastructure spending. And sometimes people do ask the question, where does it go? Because we don't see it. But that's fine. Let's talk about freight transport, especially rail and port efficiency. That's something that government is saying is going to fix that. It's going to deal with the bottlenecks. Also, ultimately, to ensure economic growth and job creation. How do you see those infrastructure investments translating into measurable economic opportunities, particularly for unemployed youth?
Well, look, the World Bank, for its part, I don't particularly celebrate loans from the World Bank as an individual, as an expert in this field, but I do respect the World Bank for its quality of research. The World Bank, in its research, it mentions that, government spending on infrastructure, and reducing taxes that are charged on the people, on the citizens and businesses, these two, they are government moves that have what the World Bank calls the highest fiscal multipliers. They have the most, productive and, benefits for the economy. So infrastructure is critical. We're talking of rail and ports. What we know so far, looking at the various research that has been made regarding rail and ports, freight logistics in South Africa, we know that because rail and ports are not performing to nameplate capacity, are not doing as they have been, are not performing as they should, we know that South Africa is losing around 350 billion each year, which is tantamount to around 5% of GDP each year, just because rail and ports are not doing as they are not performing as they should. We have a research from a company called GAIN, GAIN. Okay, and this company put out a research in 2023 which actually confirmed that South Africa is losing around 5% of GDP just because mining companies are stockpiling minerals at their companies just because there's not enough trains to fetch them to the ports. Vehicle manufacturers are taking longer to export, and so because of these things now, the economy is struggling and people can get jobs that translates to jobs in the end, entry level, middle level, executive, you name it.
And as you say, it's affecting several sectors which add a significant amount to South Africa's GDP. So that means that growth will naturally be sluggish over the next couple of years. And you're saying you're not really a fan of international financial institutions and some of these plans they put together. If we're talking debt servicing costs, do they approach it with a clear mind, recognizing the challenges that developing countries face if they cost the risk of these loans?
Well, look, if South Africa, the communique shows that South Africa would be getting this loan, the 1.5 billion loan from the World Bank, at a very, I would call it a modest interest charge, because this loan is going to be charged at an interest rate of about 4.3% plus 1.49%, which is going to have a total of 5.8% per year in interest, right? Which is going to be paid after the 3-year grace period, okay, which is of the 16 years, the first 3 years, nothing will be repaid to the World Bank, but only from the 4th year until the 16th year, then the repayments will kick in. But you're going to see this interest rate is actually quite modest. 4.3% is one of the most modest interest rates. It's just the SOFR interest rate is 4.3%, one of the most modest interest rates. They do, however, add 1.49%, which seems to insinuate the risk premium that the World Bank is, inferring that South Africa carries. But 1.49% overall, 5.8%. I think it's not really a bad loan. But why I do not support international finance institutions, really, such as the World Bank, is that if you get comfortable borrowing from them, at some point you won't be credit worthy. They will look at you, according to how they assess risk, how they assess credit worthiness, and they will determine that at this stage now you're no longer credit worthy. And when they realize you're no longer credit worthy, then they won't just give you a loan as they did in this way today, if we can call it today, because today South Africa is credit worthy. But if South Africa gets comfortable borrowing from international financial institutions, at some point, if it becomes not so credit worthy, if it begins to struggle financially, then the World Bank usually they put some conditions forward which are called structural adjustments. Then they typically tell you, I would put it this way, they typically tell you to restructure your economy. And what we've seen so far in Africa and in a lot of other developing countries is that when the World Bank begins to put conditions of controlling or restructuring your economy before they give you a loan, usually most countries that have gone through into those processes, their economies then broke. That's why other expert economists, including Professor Steve Hanke and a popular American economist, he also says that, look, the World Bank does not put out fires, it starts them.
Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts. Kevin Tutani, a political economist and consultant at ZANU Guru Advisory in Zimbabwe, speaking to us about what Treasury has put out, the fact that it and the World Bank have agreed on a $1.5 billion loan to support structural reforms aimed at helping to boost the country's infrastructure goals. It's 10 minutes to 10.
Zochitika ndimo daphiri kamlondola wazochitika pena paliponse.
Nduna wazamalonda kumalawi waletsa kampani yopanga shuga ya Irovo yomwe ndi nthambi ya Irovo Sugar Group Limited kuti isiye kutumiza shuga kumaiko akunja. Malingana ndi nduna ya zamalonda Vitumbuko Mumba, izi zithandiza kuti shuga yemwe yakusowa pamsika azipezeka. Ndiye pano ndili ndi George Muhangu amene ali mu mzinda wa Blantyre mu dziko la Malawi. Chimene chikupangitsa kuti shuga azisowa ndi chani?
Chomwe chikupangitsa kuti shuga azisowa ndichonena kuti panopo ili ngati off season ya makampani a Irovo Sugar Malawi, kunena kuti sakutha kupanga shugayi okwanira chifukwa akukolola. Ndiye akamaliza kukolola pameneno atayambeno tsopano kugaya shugayi kuti azipezeka. Chinanso ndichonena kuti ma distributors amene akumakagula shuga kaya ndi ku Irovo kaya ndi kusalima shuga akumagulisa kumaiko akunja ngati Zambia, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Mozambique. Zochitika ndipo daphiri lolemba mpaka lachisanu pa nthawi ya 7 koloko kufikira 8 koloko madzulo pa Channel Africa.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And with 8 minutes to go, we tell you about International Women in Engineering Day 2025. So it's a day that recognizes and celebrates the brilliant contributions of women shaping the future of engineering around the world. At ABB electrification, diversity and inclusion are more than just values. They're part of how innovation happens. Joining us now is Gaupalelwe Jabani, service specialist at ABB Electrification, whose journey reflects on resilience, technical excellence, and a passion for driving change in the country. A very good evening to you. And of course, I think your name says it all. Gaupalelwe, ke rata seo magorwena, ha gona se tla go pallwa.
Hi, Tipi. So, yeah, like you said, Lina Lameke Gaupalelu, Mudimu Gaupalelu, actually, to put it
so just speak a little bit closer to the microphone, Gaupalelu. There you go.
Can you?
Yes. Okay. So tell us about, sometimes they say your name reflects a lot on what you do in life and how your future is shaped out. Are you one of those people who believes that? And if you could just share examples of what seemed impossible and what you're doing now that actually shows to people.
I think maybe let me just do a little bit of correction. It's actually not ABB, it's ABB.
Ah, okay. ABB, yes, apologies. Yes, I think I'm thinking triple BEE. You can't blame me. We have to fight for everything.
Exactly. Yeah, so yes, it's ABB electrification. So I'm part of the electrification service. And yeah, so for me, like you said, I'm in a field where it's really not the easiest to be in. It's a field that needs you to be curious. It's a field that needs you to be resilient. And I think I've proven that because I've made a success in the engineering space as a female, to add to that.
So tell me a little bit more about what ABB Electrification does and how you think you have contributed to the theme this year that together we engineer. And I'm talking particularly about women in general, the girl child, given the fact that you say that it is a male-dominated sector.
Okay, so just a brief background on what ABB Electrification does is that we manufacture medium and low voltage switchgear, right? So that is our main focus. And for me, specifically what I do is that I focus on the service side of things, where I provide customers across the the sub-Saharan region with tailor-made solutions. So for me, as a female, I can clearly tell you that it's not an easy field to be in, because, like you said, in most cases you encounter males. So that really forces you to be strong, to really believe in yourself. I think that's the first step. And now what I'm currently doing, let me speak about that, is that I'm involved in a project where I am leading us as electrification service to position ourselves in the market, to share our story, leveraging off the latest technology, latest digital development, where we will share our story as electrification service, but most importantly, to share with our customers across Africa about the various solutions we have for their electrical investments.
So let's talk about that last bit that you said. And I'll put women in this because it's important. If there's still a lot of work to be done to bring more and more women into the field, just tell me, because policy design and infrastructure, it was a while ago when I realized that you have to see it from a gendered lens if you hope to uplift more and more women. What is it lacking, your industry? Is there enough work that has been done to ensure that there is not only help for, but policy design for a gendered perspective?
I think I can safely say that, we've made great development, if I may put it that way. I mean, the policies, the lawmakers and everything, now they've really tried their best efforts to ensure that, women still get the same or equal opportunities as men. But mostly there's a lot of programs that focuses on developing women. There's a lot of leadership programs, mentorship programs that are really more focusing on developing women, and not just as workers, but also as entrepreneurs, as leaders. So I think there's a lot that has been achieved in that regard.
What about skills transfer? Are there enough programs that ensure that there is a deliberate and concerted effort to uplift women in the industry to leadership roles, but to also encourage women to get into STEM studies, and also be part of the up and coming leadership?
Yes. When you look at a company like ABB, for example, 50% of the female engineers that are hired, I think from 2017, they came from the the graduate program, right? So it's such things that actually open up doors for us as women. It's such opportunities, and it's not just only the graduate programs, but there's, as I mentioned, there's also mentorship programs, not just internally within ABB, but they also collaborate, with other companies where they are uplifting women, where there's skills transfer, like you said, and they also have great opportunities where they actually allow you to literally actually plan your future or create it in a way that you want, because they also offer bursaries, they offer, a lot of opportunities for you to grow and develop as a woman in any way that you may want, especially the engineering field.
What do you say to young girls out there? What is the future of engineering in creating a better world for them?
What I can say is that engineering, it's a great field, honestly speaking. What they just need to do is to apply themselves, to be curious, and to show up, always show up 100%, because this is this is a great environment to be in. But what it does require is that you fully show up.
Well, thank you for those words of encouragement to our Listeners and viewers, World Engineering Day, particularly for Women 2025. And as we mentioned, what the theme is today, the theme is Together We Engineer Together. And she is just speaking to us about the work that they're doing. Kgaupalelo Jabane is a service specialist at ABB Electrification. And she's just speaking to us about her journey. International Women in Engineering Day 2025. That's how we end Africa World Hour on this Monday edition, 23rd of June. Can you believe it? We're already halfway down the year. Enjoy the rest of your listening and viewing here on Channel Africa, the African Perspective. Up next, Shayla Ndukumana with Hotlines.
Tshepiso Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m. Hotlines bring you fresh perspectives about love after dark with Shayla Ndukumana.
Zochitika ndi Madaphiri kamlondola wazochitika pena paliponse.
Nduna wazamalonda kumalawi waletsa kampani yopanga shuga ya Irovo yomwe ndi nthambi ya Irovo Sugar Group Limited kuti isiye kutumiza shuga kumaiko akunja. Malingana ndi nduna yazamalonda Vitumbuko Mbumba, izi zithandiza kuti shuga yemwe yakusowa pamsika azipezeka. Ndiye pano ndili ndi George Muhangu amene ali mu mzinda wa Blantyre mu dziko la Malawi. Chimene chikupangitsa kuti shuga azisowa ndi chani?
Chomwe chikupangitsa kuti shuga azisowa ndichonena kuti panopo ili ngati off season ya makampani a Irovo Sugar Malawi, kunena kuti sakutha kupanga shugayi okwanira chifukwa akukolola